Welcome to the webinar, Women Leaders in Procurement and Supply. You've come to the right place to hear about wisdom and courage today. Make sure you're settled in and ready to go. Got your glass of water, cup of tea, lunch. And of course, I want to know where you are. So please head to the chat box and tell us where you're from, but make sure when you're doing that you collect panelists, all panelists and all attendees, because we want everybody to hear from where you're from. So please use the chat box and let us know where you're all from. And again, welcome. We'll get started. So welcome to Women Leaders in Procurement and Supply, a webinar about wisdom and courage. Tēnā koukou, tēnā koukou, tēnā koukou katoa. And I'd also like to begin by acknowledging the Wurundjeri, Wurrung and Bunurong peoples of the Kulin Nation. They're our traditional custodians of the land on which I present from today, and we pay our respects to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island peoples today. We're so delighted to have so many men and women joining our conversation today, and we have around 100 registered attendees. And this is the final part of a very popular series, Women Leaders in Procurement and Supply. And shortly, I'll introduce our panellists, but first, some Zoom keeping. I'd like to advise everyone that this webinar is currently being recorded and will be made available to all attendees next week. So all attendees have been muted during the presentation. However, please, as always, use the chat box to tell us where you're from or to write any comments. But make sure you share with all panellists and all attendees, because we all want to hear what you've got to say. And at the end, we've allowed plenty of time for Q&A. So head over to the Q&A box just next to the chat box and pop your questions in there for the end of the session. Let's get started. On reflection on this series of courage and wisdom, I first went to the definition of these two powerful words: courage, the ability to do something that frightens someone, ready and willing to face negative situations that may involve danger or pain, and often thought as facing situations without fear, but it also involves facing them despite fear. And wisdom, the quality of having experience, knowledge, and good judgment. And it made me think of the courageous and wise women we all know. And feel free to use the chat function and call out some of the courageous and wise women in your life. Let us know who they are. Those women in society who have experienced good judgment and knowledge and the ability to do something that may frighten them, but they face their fear and overcome it. And I think of some of those women. I think of Kate Shepherd, who in the 1890s, she travelled with a group of women all over New Zealand to promote the idea that women should be allowed a voice in local elections. And despite fierce competition and opposition, she presented to Parliament a 270-metre long petition signed by 32,000 women. And subsequently, Parliament passed the Electoral Act. New Zealand was the first country in the world to allow women to vote. And I think of the advocate and campaigner Rosie Batty in the face of the most enormous trauma and grief over the tragic death of her son. She dedicated her life to championing against domestic violence. Or what about Nancy Wake? She's one of my favourite, better known as the White Mouse during World War II. She was a servicewoman for the Allies, and she was on the Gestapo's most wanted list. Quite a courageous woman. And then I think about Cathy Freeman, the former 400-metre sprinter, who famously and powerfully bolted her way into history at the Sydney Olympics in 2000. But that was more than just a symbol of a sprint. It was more powerful than we would ever know for her community and for our society. And then there's Dame Valerie Adams, 4 times world champion, 3 times Commonwealth champion, and 2 times Olympic shot putter. Or what about Professor Fiona Wood, who pioneered the spray-on skin treatment for burns victims? Honestly, I could spend the rest of the webinar going on about famous and courageous and wise women. But it's often those in our everyday life that inspire us with their wisdom and courage, those that face triumph over adversity and those that persevere, that chase their dreams. We can all think of someone in our life that has inspired us through their wisdom and courage. So in today's conversation, we'll hear of the experience of 3 inspirational panellists, their knowledge, judgment, and how they shaped their careers and life's journey. And I'm sure this was not without needing to find strength and courage to face their own fears. But let's find out. Introducing Cindy Dunham, Fellow of CIPS and Global Vice President Supply Chain, Australia, Pacific, Asia at Orica. Sarah Cotgreave, Fellow of CIPS and Director of Globaltraid. And Janine Anderiesz, MCIPS, Group Coach, Product and Technology, Global Internet of Things, Cybersecurity at Telstra. Welcome to you all. Thanks for joining us today. Let's leap right into it and let's unpack courage. We see you all as role models in our procurement and supply communities, and I'm sure you've had pivotal moments in your lives that have changed the course of your career. And that requires enormous courage. So let's begin by hearing your journey to leadership and what pivotal moment changed the course of your career. Sarah, I'll start with you.
Thank you, Sharon. So I remember going to a school careers fair and visiting an Institute of Purchasing and Supply stall, and actually consciously chose to go into procurement and supply, unlike many other people, when I left university. I then worked in defence, media, financial services and procurement outsourcing, mainly in the UK, but also New York. And in 2004, I was working as a director of the UK Central Procurement Trading Agency when I went on holiday and travelled to Sydney for a friend's wedding. On the way, I stopped off for a Christmas break in beautiful Penang and had to run from the beach due to a tidal wave during the Asian tsunami. This was a bit of an epiphany for me. After this, I really wanted to work in international development, and I've been lucky enough to use my procurement and supply chain skills to improve the lives of people who've been affected by disasters, conflict and poverty, both at the Asian Development Bank and the New Zealand Aid Programme.
Delighted to have you here. Great story. Thank you, Sarah. Janine, your story.
Sure, thanks, Sharon. So look, I guess like Sarah, I've just sort of takes me back to early days in my procurement journey, which was a pretty long time ago now. And I was about 18 months into the role, and in a pretty junior role, really. And I saw a role being advertised to actually lead a strategic initiative. And I read the advert and I thought, oh, that sounds kind of interesting. And I kind of read it a bit further and I thought, oh, geez, there's a lot of things on here that actually I don't tick the box for. But I'm kind of interested and I think I should have a go and I'm just not sure. And I remember at the time having a chat with my sister and she said to me, what are you waiting for? Why wouldn't you have a go and just see what actually may happen? What have you got to lose? And it was at that moment I thought she's kind of right. And so I put my head in the ring and went through the interview process. And I was up against a bunch of people that had, frankly, a lot more experience and credentials than what I did at the time. And through that interview process, I learned a lot about myself, but I also learned, I was fortunately successful in actually landing the role, much to my surprise. But my takeaway out of that experience is really, I guess, in some ways been a bit of a beacon as to how I've approached other opportunities that have presented themselves along the way. And that is that sometimes we just need to back ourselves a little bit further and have a go. because we just don't know. And it's not about actually being able to tick every box that's on that profile. It's very, and it's in fact, actually, when I was talking to my new one-up manager at the time, he said that one of the reasons why we actually did hire you for the role was for your values, belief, your work ethic, and what you felt you could learn from actually stepping into that role. So that's certainly been, I guess, certainly a pivotal moment when I think back on my career journey. That's certainly shaped as to how I've made other decisions.
Thanks, Janine. I love that story of you don't have to tick all the boxes, and your journey, your values spoke in volumes. Thank you. Cindy.
Thanks, Sharon. So for me, it was kind of more less direct path. So I started my career in finance, in mining, and I remember one day my manager came to me and said, "You must have studied law as part of your degree. So I need someone to step into the contract space because we've had a couple of people absent and we need some help. Could you have a go?" And I said, "As long as you promise me you'll keep my role and I'm coming back." And I think it was about a week into that role that I realized that procurement and contracting was my true calling, and I spent my time then really trying to understand the whole of supply chain, inventory, warehousing, and ended up in a manager position for the supply chain on that site. And then one day my husband transferred to Perth. That was in Kalgoorlie. My husband transferred to Perth, and a director role came up in supply chain in one of the large global mining companies, and I thought, I'll have a crack at it, why not? And I was hired as the youngest and first female director in that company, and I kind of embraced that role. I loved it, and from then on my career's just kind of evolved in supply chain and most recently into transformation. And transformation is really an extension of supply chain. You're really trying to reorganize the business to be the most efficient that it can, and then just 7 weeks ago moved back into supply chain. So I didn't have a real direct path, but it's been a great career and a great journey. And I think just having a go and backing yourself into those roles where you don't really feel 100% confident, as Janine said, but having enough confidence in yourself to be successful at anything you put your mind to.
Thanks, Cindy, and great to have you back in supply chain too, for selfish reasons, of course.
Thank you.
So let's talk a little bit about, I suppose, failure. Let's put it out there. Often we learn about success through our failures, and what this teaches us is, although failure can be painful, and although we have developed a bit of an aversion to failure, it actually allows us to unlock great potential. So a question for you, Janine. I'm keen to really hear about what's been one of your failures, or let's call it a growth and learning moment, and that's shaped your leadership.
Yeah, sure, Sharon. Also, look, I think that certainly the word failure, it has a lot of, I guess, historically it's had a lot of negative connotations to it. And I think society-wise, we are actually starting to realize that our greatest learnings and greatest moments of growth can actually come from those times. And it's something which I think as time's gone on that I have a much deeper appreciation for that. When I think back along the journey, and there's been quite a few failures, let me tell you, but one that I'll actually share today is just when I was actually heading up a supply chain team, and I was asked to take on responsibility for the properties team as well, which I didn't really actually have a huge amount of understanding as to around the property space at the time. And it was very much about going into that role and actually shifting the focus of that group to look at more strategic management of the property portfolio as well as the day-to-day management. And I guess, stepping into that role, I didn't actually spend enough time to begin with at the beginning to really understand where the team was at on that change journey. And so the pace at which I was going and the pace at which they were going were two different speeds, which often led to a lot of confusion, misunderstanding, communication breakdown, and a whole raft of challenges, which I absolutely learnt the hard way. And so we're reflecting on that time. Some of the things that I've actually learnt from that is just when we're communicating, no matter what the situation, is really focusing on the why. Creating spaces where, leadership is very much about all of us coming on the journey. It's not one or two people getting there. And how do we create an environment where people actually feel safe to say what they're uncomfortable about, what they're unsure about? as much about what they're actually excited about, because everyone copes with change differently. And being open and transparent, and just an opportunity for everyone to actually contribute and collaborate was some of the things that I took away out of that experience. But it's certainly at the time, it was a tough lesson to learn in real time.
I'll bet. Thank you for that, Janine. Cindy, do you have some insights here?
Like Janine, I've got 100 learnings, but the one that sticks in my mind is a really early management learning, and that was when one of my staff came to me and said, do you know that you don't really say thank you very often? And for me, that was like, it was pretty tough to hear, and it was very brave of him to tell me. But when I went away to think about it, I actually realized that that's not something I look for. I don't look for praise, because I feel like I get that out of my own like job satisfaction, but then I realized that some people really do, and so I've made a conscious effort in my career to be like overtly thankful to people, and because I know that that's what they're looking for and that's what they need, and I think it's also helped me to kind of seek feedback a little bit more as well, so that people don't feel like they have to go on a limb to tell me what they like or don't like about my leadership style. I actively kind of seek that information, because I think very few of us get the learnings on how to be a great manager or a leader, but you can learn that from practically, seeking that feedback and then implementing what you think is personally going to contribute to your leadership style.
That's fantastic. And how does the team respond to that now? What's the relationship with your team like?
Well, I think so. Now I've got a new team. I've had a new team for 7 weeks, and I think it takes a little while for people to realize that you really are open to that feedback, and that you will change your behaviors or the way that you respond to them because of that feedback. And I think it's really important, particularly in this environment. We've got people that span like generations who are used to certain styles. We've got new people in the organization. I tend to think millennials are really keen to give feedback, and other generations are not so keen. So you have to be open and be authentic about the way that you ask for it and receive it, and then what you're going to do with it. There's no point asking for feedback if you don't do anything with it. But I think that authenticity is something that kind of helps people feel comfortable telling you.
Thank you for that. So nice segue into kind of leadership qualities. I'm really keen to unpack that, because we get those standard textbook positions on leadership qualities: communication, delegation, integrity, influence, accountability, etc. But I'm really interested, and Sarah, we might start with you. In your own words, what is one quality that you value most, that's uniquely you, that's your kind of signature leadership, I suppose? And if you've got an example on how that plays out in your leadership.
I'd like to choose curiosity. I think, if you stand still, you die. You're like a dinosaur. We all know what happens to dinosaurs. And how curiosity plays out for me is in a number of ways. I like to understand the industries that I'm working with, but also I like to understand what best practice is, and that's led me to an interest in continuous improvement. So I always want to know why people are excelling. I always read case studies or people who win awards, just to understand whether I could translate that into my own organization. So I used to work for an organization called GE Capital in Europe, and my nickname was Miss Pilot, because I used to pilot everything. And I wanted to know whether auctions would be something that could help my organization. So I decided to become the pilot site for e-auctions. This was in 1996, which was quite early. And we decided to use them for low-cost country sourcing. And so what we would do is we would go out and find potential suppliers, invite them to an initial auction to provide some pricing. And then we would go and do some further due diligence on those organizations to see whether actually we wanted to deal with them, were they ethical, did they have the right quality, whatever. And then we would bring them into a further auction for final selection. And it was actually a very worthwhile project, saved the organization a whole bunch of money. But it you know, it was very early days, got a lot of negative press about bringing in American techniques into the UK, and we don't want those techniques. Please take them away again from the industry. But it was a fun learning experience.
I love that. So curiosity, I think that's a really great quality. Thank you. And Cindy, you may have given us a bit of a glimpse into your qualities, but would you like to share further?
Yeah, so authenticity is mine. I just think as a leader, there's nothing more empowering than, you know, have people believing you and believing that you care about them. And like in the companies that I've worked for, I genuinely care about the people that I've worked with and for. And, you know, I've had to deliver some pretty devastating news to some families, and you know, I've been part of some, you know, pretty special moments, amazing, great moments, but some pretty tough ones as well. And I think that if people feel like you're authentic and the things that you're saying to them you genuinely mean, then I think people are much more open and feel passionate about not only committing to the company, but committing to me and the targets that we set and the deliverables that we have for the organization. And, you know, whether they are cost saving targets, which, you know, obviously supply chain get targeted with all the time, but really things like the ethical behaviours and the things that we feel passionate about in the market that kind of set our brand up for the company. So I genuinely want people around a barbecue to say that the company is a great company to work for, and they're really proud of that. So I think authenticity is key to my leadership style.
Yeah, beautiful. And authenticity covers so much, doesn't it? And if we're being true to ourselves, we're being authentic, you know, we're able to be curious and vulnerable and humble and all those elements. So by being true to ourselves, thank you. Now let's shift the dial a little to the importance of really investing in ourselves, but investing in ourselves in personal growth for our career progression and really developing our strengths. So for many of us, it's a lifelong journey. You know, I'll never stop studying and learning and being curious too, Sarah. And it's an ongoing process. So I might start with you, Janine, but ask everyone, what development have you undertaken to advance your leadership?
Sure. So I guess for me, it's absolutely, I think what you've just described is absolutely on point. And what Sarah was saying before, it's about that lifelong commitment and absolutely about being curious. But a bit of philosophy that I follow, which I suspect many people on the call could relate to, is really around adopting a 70-20-10 learning model approach to how I go about things. And 70% knowledge on the job experience, 20% through interacting with others, and 10% through like formal, you know, certifications and education, and just a mindset of having a go and being open to possibilities. And I think just by being open to actually immersing yourself in areas which really feel foreign and you don't know a heck of a lot about, and they might seem like it might seem kind of daunting to begin with, but actually connecting through various different events. Like there's so many different events now, particularly even in an online environment, whether it be meetups and industry events, where you can actually forge connections with others, irrespective of your experience level, and actually develop informally a really nice network and an opportunity to get involved and collaborate. And there's some of the things I still absolutely do today, and I feel I get a lot of energy and fulfillment from participating as well as contributing. So that's certainly been me. But I tend to try and sort of have a goal of aspiring to learn something new and explore a certification of some sort, at least a couple a year if I can.
Terrific. And Janine and I have been conspiring to try and work out some development opportunities for others in terms of through workshops, haven't we? So maybe watch this space next year for that one. Cindy, what about yourself?
Yeah, so like Janine, I think most of my learning has really been on the job learning and stretching myself beyond, like anchoring myself to something. So when I had a finance background as a degree, like then stretching myself into the supply chain and other parts of the supply chain, but then more broadly within industry, working in the rail networks, and now working in manufacturing, being able to stretch myself more broadly. But about 2 years ago when I moved to Orica in Melbourne, I started a senior executive MBA program, and I think the timing was perfect for me, because had I done the MBA when I was straight out of school, I don't think I would have had the life experiences to get the full value from it. So I actually really appreciated going back and understanding what I had learnt on the job, you know, the names of the frameworks that I'd implemented or that I'd used over time, and how to apply them in a better, you know, more advantageous way for the company. And it's just kind of refining those skills. So I think the timing was perfect for me. I wouldn't have got the value out of it earlier, but I'm definitely getting some value out of it now.
Oh, great. And of course, you know, that the networking is also of value in terms of developing your personal networks, builds your own personal development, doesn't it?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Sarah, what about yourself?
Well, like Cindy, I also have a MBA, and I chose to study one in financial services because that's the area I was working at the time. And I also have a second master's degree in international trade. So when I was working for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade in New Zealand, I was very interested in the mission of the organisation and how it operates in the world. So I always think it's worth doing that extra work to learn about the industry that you're working in. I talked about curiosity earlier. I'm also trying to learn something every day. So I do read a lot of blogs. LinkedIn is very good. I follow some great writers on LinkedIn. I also host some best practice sites, which allows me to learn. Luckily, LinkedIn does most of the administration automatically, so it's quite easy. Obviously, my CIPS qualifications were great in the early days, and I learned about things that I don't necessarily need to use during my career, like stock keeping and things like that. But you know, it gives you a good grounding so that when you do talk to people in manufacturing, you understand what it's about. One of the greatest learning opportunities I've had is actually been through CIPS just recently as a management entry route assessor, and I get to meet some fabulous people who are procurement managers and directors, and they talk to me about their experience, and I definitely benefit more than they do, I would say, because I get to learn about all of the best practice that's being used across Australia and New Zealand, even in Africa and Europe. And so if any of you ever get the opportunity to be an MER assessor, I would definitely recommend it.
Oh, terrific. Thanks, Sarah. And, you know, and that's what it's for our members, for MCIPS, you know, it is a lifelong journey. You know, you do all the study and you get to MCIPS, but it doesn't stop there. That's actually when the life journey begins, and you continually increase that knowledge. So terrific to hear. Thank you. What we might do is move to another favourite of mine, and that's around culture and organisation and team. And look, I've got to say, the word culture has become I reckon, the buzzword of the last decade. And it's arguably a good corporate culture is the most important element to a successful workplace. So, Janine, how important is team and culture in your leadership?
Look, I think it's absolutely everything, Sharon, and you're absolutely right. It's used so much, but I think there's definitely been acknowledgement as businesses have to reimagine their future model and where they're going to, is to how we really unpack and unlock and unleash the power of teams, because the challenges that businesses are actually facing into now, no one person can actually solve it alone. And so I think you would have heard that saying, or maybe some of you have heard the saying, you know, culture eats strategy for breakfast, by that famous leadership management consultant, Peter Drucker. And actually, this is an area that's a real passion and interest to me, particularly in my line of work now. And I thought I'd share something which I certainly personally anchor to in my day-to-day role each day. And that's from some recent research that's been conducted by Google. And Google actually spent 2 years researching this particular topic because they felt it was so critically important for their business. And they interviewed about 200 people across their business, and they interviewed them on 250 attributes and about 180 active teams. So it's quite a large sample size. And they were looking to find the perfect mix of individuals' traits and skills as to what's necessary for a stellar team. And what they actually learned was it was about actually not your team, who's on your team matters less than how the team actually interacts with each other and how they work together and value their contributions. And so there's 5 key factors that you need for any high performing team, really key dynamics that set the teams apart. And the first one is psychological safety, which is really around where everyone in the team can feel safe to take risks without feeling insecure, embarrassed. And that's the absolute foundation. When you have that, that's a starting point to then go to the next step. The next one is dependability, is, can we count on each other to do high quality work and to do it on time? The third one is around structure and clarity, and that are our goals and roles and execution plans for the team actually clear? And then fourth is, do we actually have meaning in our work? Does it actually mean something to us personally? Because when it actually does, we get energy and fulfillment from that, and others do too, and that creates that sense of buzz, as we know what that feels like when it's part of a high performing team. And then finally is the impact of our work. Do we fundamentally believe that the work that we're doing matters? And when we do, that's when we absolutely have that deep sense of purpose. We don't show up for the paycheck, we show up for so much more than that. So I'm an absolute firm believer and advocate that team and culture are really critical to the future success of individuals, teams and businesses.
Oh, absolutely. And you've mentioned the purpose word, and you're absolutely right. I think if you're all aligned on purpose and potentially with your personal purpose, showing up is a lot easier. But I would add one more thing, that it needs to be fun. Workplaces need to be fun. There needs to be enjoyment. There needs to be celebration. And we need to take ourselves a little less seriously. So I think that's also an element that's added to culture. All right, I have heard Psychology Today reports that, wait for it, people in 20% of their conversations with strangers, co-workers, and even romantic partners are lying. And most adults spend most of their time at work. It's this capacity for deception that ultimately drives the need for understanding on how to build trust in a team and in a workplace. And with that, if we're 20% of us are lying some of the time, we must actively work to instill confidence among our team members. Sarah, how do we build trust as a leader?
Well, thank you for that question. Well, taking the lying side of your preamble there, I think it's really important when you're in a procurement role to have the highest level of integrity. And I do actually try to make sure that I report all potential conflicts of interest. When you're in the public sector or in the international arena, that you are open to quite a lot of questions, and quite rightly so. You're spending the public's money, and it's really important to be transparent about what you're doing. So I would say for the public sector stakeholders of the public, then you do need to be as transparent as possible and publish what you're doing, what you're spending money on. And I've always tried to do that in public roles. When I'm working within an organization, I think an easier way to build trust is to communicate a simple vision. Sometimes in the past, my visions haven't been that clear. I've worked on trying to make it simpler and clearer for the whole team. And that's so that you can all move in the same direction. I had a great speech by our Director General of Health in New Zealand recently, where he was talking about New Zealand's response to COVID. And he said that one of the factors of success was that they had a clear communication of the vision for COVID, and that people really understood what they were going to do, and also that they were doing it together, and that their actions, being kind and taking care of other people, were just as important as following the rules. And I think, taking that back into the workplace, if you have a clear vision and you demonstrate that you're prepared to live by those principles yourselves, so you're doing it by action as well as just words, and that is a way of increasing trust. I also think it's important to make sure that you have champions within your organization, particularly if you're a leader, and they may be in different parts of the world or different divisions, that they also demonstrate those principles, and they're clear on how they communicate that to people, because it is a journey that you take together. And I think it's really important to report on your progress on that journey and highlight the success of others along the journey.
I love that. Clear communication, make sure you're understood, do it together, show kindness. Love it. Thank you, Sarah. I'm going to move again, change gears again, where we're thinking about leadership and the process of becoming a leader. Cindy, you've had a brilliant career journey so far, and I'm sure it's not going to stop here. And now the position that you're at in Orica. How did you get in your current role? I'm sure there's many people out here listening who are trying to get into procurement, or, you know, in a role that they're trying to move up in. Love to hear your advice in this area.
Yeah, I would say my journey to Orica started because of networking. So I think the most important part in senior leadership roles is that I think you very rarely apply for roles once you get to a point in your career, and people generally are looking for someone that has a proven track record. So I ended up having a really brilliant conversation with the CEO and one of the presidents from Orica, just as a coincidence, really, and they both inspired me, and I guess I inspired them to ask me to come and run a transformation program at Orica, which was, for me, it was a massive move. I have kids in Perth, so it was I packed up my home and left my kids in Perth and moved to Melbourne, and so it really had to be a job that was going to get me excited and want to get me out of bed every day and leave my kids. So it was just such a great opportunity, and I think the networking was the key to figuring out and having a proven track record. I guess the role that I took on 7 weeks ago in supply chain was because I have a demonstrated career in functioning supply chains and improving supply chains, and that was something that Orica really wanted some additional support in. And so, yeah, I was asked by the CEO to step in and take this role. So like I said, I think at one point in your career, it doesn't become about applying for roles anymore. It becomes about being the best you that you can be, and for people witnessing and seeing that without you having to be overtly selling yourself. It's really based on performance.
Thanks for that. And that value of networking, you know, is so important. And, you know, a lot of people ask, you know, how do I get started? You know, I always think volunteering and networking is so key, because volunteering, you get the experience and you build your networks. But, you know, ongoing networking is really important. Strategy and vision. I'd like to ask this question of everybody. But before I ask this question, I'm going to stop asking questions soon, and I'm going to throw it over to the audience. So make sure you get your questions into the Q&A box, because we're ready to go shortly. What are the strategies and tactics that procurement leaders can undertake to ensure they get that seat at the table and secure their positioning to ensure that procurement is at the heart of the organisation's strategy? Sarah, we might start with you.
Okay, well, I think today the minimum requirement for a good procurement professional or leader is to deliver quality goods and service on time, ethically, and achieving value for money. That's the baseline. That's just what is expected as your job. What C-suite leaders are particularly interested in these days is the additional benefits that a good procurement professional or leader can bring to the organisation. So that might be sustainable economic or governance benefits. And well, they're really looking for the organisation's reputation to be enhanced, for the development of collaborative and innovative partnerships to bring new markets, new supply chains, new value chains to the organisation. That I think that the definitions and boundaries between, you know, the sales and demand side and the supply and procurement side are being removed. If you're not close to your demand or your sales group, then I think, you know, you're missing a trick. And you really need to be creating new value for shareholders and for the wider society.
Thank you. Definitely. Janine, do you have any insights on this?
Sorry, I'm just going to apologise. There's a lot of background noise where I am at the moment. Do you mind if we just pass to Cindy and it'll come back to me? Is that okay, Sharon?
Yeah, absolutely. Cindy.
Yeah, thanks. I think all those things that Sarah said, I 100% agree with. I'd like to add that I've been in organisations where procurement has not had a seat at the table, and I think there's two ways of tackling it. One can be a hard climb, and it's through demonstrating value. But the other way is I've actually been in a position where I've gone to the CEO and said, you're losing value in this company because I don't have a seat at the table. So can I get a seat at the table? And I was fortunate enough that I was given a seat at the table. And, I referred to my team often as, the light's on you and you have to dance now. So yeah, you can ask for a seat, but you have to be able to deliver when you get there. And I think you can either work hard and demonstrate value and wait for it to happen, or just seek it.
Thank you. Terrific. Janine, you're back in a spot where you can talk.
Hopefully it's not so crazy noise in the background, so I apologise everyone. So look, I guess just to add to what Sarah and Cindy have said, I would actually say at this point, it's just really around taking the time to understand what are the biggest challenges that your organisation's actually facing right now. What are they going after? Why are they going after it? There's so much change that's actually happening. Every business is disrupted. And it's around what are the measures that really matter to them? Is it around customer satisfaction? Is it around employee experience? Is it around financial performance? And I think it's about actually having that curiosity to actually go and understand that and actually speak the language of our stakeholders. When we understand what their big rocks are, and not just understanding who our stakeholders are, but who are their customers and what are their pain points. And that's when I think we start to really understand where the untapped opportunities might be, what's important to them, and then how do we collaborate to go after what matters. And then we can actually better align to make start with some of the small things and then progress up that curve to things that are more complex and more strategic and gain that credibility and trust. So sometimes what might be small to us may be super important to them, but start there because there's no better place to start.
That's terrific. So it's really thinking about not what your needs are, what your functions need is, it's the overall business's needs and how you can address it. And you will get that seat at the table if you can. Thank you. In terms of innovation, and Janine, we might just stay with you for a minute. How do you bring innovation into a procurement function to ensure you're simply not viewed as that gatekeeper for compliance and regulation? You're actually transformational and you're adding value to the whole organisation.
Oh, look, I think procurement's one of the most amazing functions in any business, sometimes undervalued and underappreciated. Largely just the vantage point that procurement actually has, that internal focal point into the business and the external focal point out to our partners in the ecosystem and suppliers. And so now more than ever before, I think every business is realizing that the challenges they're facing into, they're going to need to partner with others to be successful, that what's got us to here isn't going to get us to there. And so as a result of that, procurement's in a wonderful position. Yes, all businesses are, most businesses are in a very cost constrained environment right now. And all the more reason why they'll be actually coming to procurement to actually look for solutions and innovative ideas. I really love Sarah's comment earlier on around piloting. And I'm a firm believer of that as well. And particularly in an environment where the business is actually cash strapped, don't necessarily want to make big commitments and not necessarily sure whether that investment's actually going to pay dividends. So by getting into pilots, applying a lean startup approach, and by that I mean exploring what the actual needs are, building, measuring, learning, and going through that feedback loop and that cycle is where we all learn, grow and evolve. And I think that's certainly going to be the way most businesses will kind of need to go, whether they acknowledge that or not right now.
Terrific. Sarah, can you build on that?
Sure. So I think it is important to think when you're setting up your program or your strategy about what the wider benefits you can bring on. Now, I obviously have a slightly different viewpoint of working international development, but like to give you a few ideas about, you know, what I mean. It's not just about what you buy, and it's about how you do it, the method. So I once worked on a program to introduce low-cost electric vehicles into the Philippines, and these were designed to replace horribly polluted diesel tricycles. There's about 2 million of them in the Philippines, and if you've ever lived in Manila, you'll know how busy and dirty it is because of these diesel tricycles. So as well as trying to source a new type of vehicle, we had a target price of under $2,500 for these vehicles that needed to be able to carry 4 people and a pig. That was the specification. We started our consultation early with the market because there was no local market for manufacturing these vehicles. In fact, you know, there wasn't really one in the world, but we wanted to make sure that we weren't going to displace local suppliers, and we wanted to try and build a local supply chain really early. And so we looked at how we could encourage local suppliers to work with new motor and battery suppliers, and also the electrical infrastructure charging facilities, those suppliers, to build relationships in advance of the procurement, so that we were actually trying to create a new supply and value chain for the country, and hopefully encourage economic development of that. A smaller example, which might be a bit more relatable to normal procurement, is a catering company that trains staff in prison. Now, sometimes catering companies do actually find it difficult to find trained staff. And so what this catering company was doing was training them whilst they were in prison, and then taking on the people who had the right skills and outlook into employment once they left prison. Now, this obviously had quite a lot of benefits for the company because they had a stream of new employees. It also benefited the ex-offender and their family, but also for wider society, because one of the reasons that people may reoffend is that they don't have an opportunity to earn money as soon as they come out of prison. So, you know, that this is a type of program which has a wider social value, but also helps the organization just to get those resources that they need. So I think, as I said, it's very important to think about the method of how you achieve your objectives, as well as just achieving the objectives.
Great examples. Thank you, Sarah. We are getting some good questions coming through, so let's get stuck into some of the audience questions. The first one comes from Knut, and also thank you, Knut. In your comment, you've said that Madame Curie is an inspirational woman, so thanks for sending that through. Knut's question is, what's the one role that you had that gave the most meaning to you personally, and why? I'll open up to whoever wants to go first.
I'm happy to start. Sorry, Sarah.
No, you go.
Thank you. I moved into a role in a company that I'm not going to name, but I moved in there when they had not achieved targets for a number of years, and they'd had an ERP implementation and were pretty dissatisfied with their roles, and that was really impacting on their deliverables and performance. And, you know, I recognised the cultural issues within the organisation more than I did their capabilities to not deliver. So I spent time working on culture, and you know, I left that organization when they'd successfully achieved their targets for the first time in a long time. The company was in a very good position, but more importantly, people really enjoyed their job. Procurement is such an exciting job to be in, and if you can find the niche that you specialize in and that gets you excited and gets you out of bed every day, I mean, that's the legacy that I like to leave in an organization.
Beautiful. Thank you. Sarah?
Yeah, so I once had a job where I was recruited into a greenfield position, which was an investment bank in London, and they got a procurement manager because all the other banks were getting one, so they thought they needed one too, and they weren't quite sure what they were going to get out of a procurement team. They thought they might get some cheaper stationery or something like that. So the first thing I did was to receive the accounts payable schedule and have a look at it. And as well as negotiating discounts with local restaurants in Mayfair, which there seemed to be a lot of expenditure on, and was a great program of negotiation, because I had to do some quality tests as well. What I said to them was that they were spending about $500,000 a year on stationery, but they were spending $50 million a year on market data, and which would they rather that I looked at first. And I was able to demonstrate to them by looking at things that they would not expect a procurement person to look at, like market data or trading fees for securities in different markets, that we made some really substantial savings, and just demonstrated the value of the organization. And I really enjoyed that job.
Thank you. Thank you. We might keep moving, if that's okay, to the next question. And Sally asks, how do you manage uncomfortable conversations in your role, both as a leader and to your stakeholders, particularly questions around gender gap, which is still an issue today? Cindy, do you have any thoughts on this?
Sure. Head on. I tackle them head on, because that's the only way we're going to change that. I mean, I have daughters, and I'm wanting to create an environment where they will feel empowered to do any role that they want to and earn the same money as anyone else who's suitably qualified for the role. So I think it's a conversation I really try and have often. And I also think that diversity in teams is super important. I always try and make sure that I build a leadership team around me that has the diversity to be challenging for me and for the company, but also people that in technical competencies and as well as commercial competencies, and so for me it's not just gender, it's we operate around the world, and I need diversity of thought and diversity of skills and competencies. So I tackle it head on. It's not something that should be brushed under the carpet, and it's not just a gender conversation. It's much more broader than that.
Thank you. And I suppose it speaks volumes as to who you're working for too, that you can tackle these issues as well. So you'd want to be working for an organisation that is going to allow you to challenge that status quo as well.
Well, I think that's true, but most of the roles that I've had, I've often been the first female in those roles, and so you create a pathway. You create a pathway for others, whether it's being facilities to make it capable for others, whether they're prayer rooms or feeding facilities for mothers, joint bathrooms, shower facilities. I mean, some of the first roles that I've been in, the facilities just weren't there for me to be able to be successful in those roles, but I didn't walk away from them. I created the facilities to be able to do that, so future generations can do that. So yeah, I mean, I think partly it's a company, partly the company has to absolutely sponsor and back you, but you have to be passionate and determined enough to be pushed through, because none of those things were easy to come by.
Great, thank you. Does anyone have anything to add?
I just echo Cindy's sentiments, and I think it's absolutely about, sure, the company sponsorship's really helpful, but I think it's also incumbent on each of us individually that when we feel passionate about a topic, that we do have the courage to actually raise it. And also, I guess, the mindfulness to understand others' points of view as well, so that when we are having these tough conversations, we can actually acknowledge others' points of view, put forward our own, and then find a collaborative way to actually move things forward. And it might be a small step, but a step towards a bigger change, and every small step matters.
Absolutely, thank you. Another question from an anonymous. Great panelists, thank you. Do you feel that you've had to alter your leadership style or approach as to being masculine in your approach to be effective? Sarah, do you want to go there?
Okay. Well, I started my career at a time when it was and worked in very masculine type industry. So I started off in defense. I worked in power generation, and then I worked in investment banking, which was super macho at the time. I felt I had to be really professional for people to take me seriously. I was quite capable of standing my own ground if they didn't, but I never felt the need to dress like a man or wear like a man, or whatever it was going to be. To fit in that way, I always felt that, you know, I would be true to myself and act in a way which was professional and delivered the results, and let that speak for itself. And I think, you know, Cindy has said some similar things earlier on. I think there's less of a requirement to do that these days, and people actually appreciate diversity more. But yeah, I think sometimes in my early career it actually helped me to stand out. But I think it's also incumbent on senior female leaders to make sure that there is a pathway for other women or other people who may face some disadvantages or bias to be able to succeed.
Thank you. Another question of any panel member with family responsibilities. Have you ever faced dilemmas in whether you should push ahead in your career and the uncertainties in terms of family life balance? How did you approach this? And what was the thinking process in terms of arriving at whatever decision you made?
I actually don't like the term work-life balance because I think it kind of takes away from the fact that we make work-life choices. So I had young kids when I was in senior roles, and my husband and the kids and I sat down and talked about, you know, what was important for me and my career and what was important for us and our family, and we made choices. My husband actually stepped down from his job for a couple of years while I was traveling globally constantly, and it was a choice that our family made. So I don't think it ever impacted on our family or our career because we made those choices together. No one felt like that was a choice I'd made in isolation. But I think it's really important that actually we encourage that with our teams as well, because people will make choices around particularly having a child and having some time away from work, and is that going to impact on my career? And I think, you know, whilst your career development is your own responsibility, I think that it's incumbent upon any leader to make sure that we create opportunities for them to continue to grow in their careers while they make the choices around their families, when to start, and yeah, what choices they make personally.
Thank you. Any additions there?
Yeah, I'll just add to that by saying, I think absolutely, obviously family is a big one, but for folks that don't necessarily have children, but we all have priorities outside of work and life priorities. And I think we just, when we respect that, and it might well be someone wants to go to a flexible work arrangement because they want to take a day a week to go and pursue a part-time hobby. That's fantastic, right? Because that person's going to feel more fulfilled by pursuing something that they love and enjoy. And so that shouldn't preclude them from, you know, progression or success is to have a way to find it. And I think it's such a personal definition. And whatever balance means is so personal once again. So I think it's just more about creating spaces and environments where people feel comfortable to show up being them whole selves.
Beautiful, thank you. A great question has just come our way. I've attended all 3 of this series and it's been exciting to see so many inspiring women featured. I'm new to procurement, and within weeks of being in a role, I already knew that this was going to be my career of choice. Fantastic. My organisation is dominated by male leaders who have been supportive and encouraging, which has contributed to my confidence. But sadly, I've recently discovered they've underpaid me against what other people get. What is your advice for me to deal with this around pay negotiations?
I always think that procurement people are in the best position ever to go and negotiate their salaries, and it's just another negotiation. So do your homework, do your research, go in armed with the information that you want in a respectful way to have the conversation and be open to receive the feedback that, you know, why their salary was pitched at the rate it was. But I always say for procurement people, this is your time to shine. Like there's no one else more eminently qualified in the organisation to go and negotiate their salary, but do your homework.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I would say there's a great CIPS resource, the CIPS and Hayes salary survey, which will give you a benchmark against, you know, people in your industry and your city. So you'll be able to take some data with you, as well as maybe approaching it from a less ideal point of my colleague. So, you know, do use published benchmarks as well as just knowledge.
Yeah, I'll probably add to that by saying as well, as part of what's important to you, I know salary is obviously one measure, but as part of, there might be some other benefits that you'd actually like, whether it be the organisation to fund some personal development or professional development, something that's of value to you, which, you know, sometimes depending on where the organisation's at and where they're at in their remuneration cycle, it may not be physically possible to approach that for them to make a change with respect to salary at a point in time. So what are some of the other things, some other ideas that you can plant some seeds with them as to what would be of value to you?
Great way to finish the questions. Thank you. We are going to move on in the interest of time. What I want to is close with one final comment, and it's also shared by one of our listeners, Cynthia Chung asked as well. In your wisdom to your younger self, now that you are where you're at with your career, what would you say to the younger you? Cindy, we'll start with you.
Just accept every challenge that comes your way. Have a crack. There's nothing that you can lose, but just trust in yourself. Believe that you can deliver, and you know, take every opportunity. You won't regret it. But don't look too far down the track. Just accept each challenge as they come.
Beautiful. Sarah?
I think mine would be, don't be afraid to ask for help. People actually love to help, and you can do that a number of ways, like asking for people's experience, or even just getting yourself a mentor or a coach, or asking your manager to help you find the right person.
Thank you.
And I just add to that by saying, I think it's great to have ambition and aspiration, but my learning would be that there's not necessarily one path to get there. You can get through so many different ways. And I think just having the mindset and the curiosity, to anchor to what Sarah was saying earlier, on just taking the first step, and you'll learn something and then you'll take the next one. So that would be my advice to myself.
Thank you. And thank you, Cindy, Sarah and Janine. A fantastic session today, and to all of the panellists who have been part of this journey for the last four episodes. Just a terrific webinars, thank you, and hopefully we'll repeat again next year. And a special thanks for Sophia Pereira, who's been the brainchild of this popular series. Such a well-received series of webinars that have been carefully and lovingly produced by Sophia. So thank you, Sophia. Before you go, but wait, there's more. Tomorrow we're running another webinar. It's the Modern Slavery Act, Key Compliance Trends and Next Steps. And we invite you to join us for a workshop webinar. And it's in collaboration, this is a great one, with the Australian Border Force team and Informed 365. So make sure that you check it out on our website or via LinkedIn and register today to be part of that webinar tomorrow. And as always, to all of our attendees, we hope you found this really insightful as much as I have. I've loved having everybody here, panellists and attendees. But before you leave today, we want to continue to make quality webinars. So please just take some little time to complete our survey. Until we meet again, thank you again, and be safe.